Hey, what up, y'all? What up, what up? I am Lou, and today we're going to be talking about AWS Transfer Family. So we're going to kind of walk through the process. We're going to kind of discuss what is it? What is Transfer Family? We're going to discuss on how to set it up and some of the settings that need to occur before you even try to set it up, like making sure you have a policy created in AWS IAM. Make sure that you have a role created. We'll walk through the process of creating some SSH keys that we will need. And so we'll kind of go through all of the prerequisitions of what you need to do before you even try to set up your AWS transfer. And then we'll set it up. And then we'll kind of go through some scenarios on why this is beneficial, on why this could be a replacement to your old traditional way of managing files, communicating files via SFTP. So we'll kind of go through all of that, but let's go ahead and get started, guys. Hey, the sponsor of today's video is GoShareIt. Go check them out at GoShareIt.io. It's a sharing platform that allows you to share large and small files, where it makes it very easy to share. Your recipient, all they need is a download link, and they're good to go. Again, go check them out. Also, guys, before we get started, if you can give me a like, give me a follow, I appreciate it. You know, I've been getting a lot of support. Appreciate for the followers, and let's get started, guys. So let's kind of review real quick. What is AWS Transfer? Why would you even want to set one up? What's the purpose behind it? And all of that, right? So anybody who has communicated in the past with like an FTP or SFTP site, you know, just the basic mechanics of what that is pretty much you have a server, you set up, again, SFTP or FTP protocol, and that is a method of transferring files, right? You normally will use a tool like FileZilla. There's other tools out there, but you know, you'll use some kind of FTP tool, and which allows you to just drop files in there, and ultimately it'll upload it to the SFTP or FTP server, and then, or you could download files as well, right? Connect to it through to the client application like FileZilla. Then you could just download files as well. So it's just a method of being able to communicate files. A lot of businesses, again, use FTP, SFTP for the purpose of communicating files. You know, so one thing you hear a lot in programming is like APIs. Well, if you're not dealing with API, if you're not communicating data that way, most likely you're going to be communicating data through some sort of method like an SFTP, where you're handing off a file and then you're receiving a file, right? It kind of goes both ways. So, and that's where this comes in. Now, what I want to call the traditional way of doing it would be, if you're dealing with a client and let's say they're giving you files for you to process, right? You're gonna do some ETL processing and ultimately load it to a data warehouse and doing all that kind of stuff. The way it would normally work is they would potentially just drop it to an FTP, SFTP site, and then you would have to have a process to connect to the SFTP, download the file, then ultimately, let's say, move it to an S3 bucket or move it to an Azure storage or somewhere, right? But you end up moving it in again, I'm talking about more like cloud services right now, but you will move it somewhere else in order for you to process it, to do something with the files. Well, one of the things that Amazon did here with AWS Transfer Family, pretty much what it is, you're setting up a server and a service that is pretty much is going to act no different than a traditional SFTP site, you know, or FTP. And the only difference is the backend. The backend, instead of you having a physical server where the files are being dropped into, and then you have to ultimately access those files either by connecting to the physical server or by connecting to the FTP or SFTP site to download it. In this case, as files are dropped into the SFTP or FTP, they're actually being uploaded directly to an S3 bucket, which makes a big difference, because if you're processing files, then now you can start automating a lot of the processes. As files get dropped into your SFTP, using AWS Transfer Family, it'll take that file and save it directly to an S3 bucket. And then from there, you could have either triggers, you could have schedules running that run every hour. You can have triggers created using AWS Lambda, where it's kind of like anytime a new file is dropped into your S3 bucket, it will execute a process, which could be an ETL process, whatever it is. Again, whatever you could do after that's unlimited, but that's a key aspect of it, right? And what that also does, it kind of gives you some flexibility where if you're trying to automate certain processes that maybe you don't necessarily want to write code to do for different reasons. There's some organizations where maybe you don't want to write some code to do a specific task because maybe you don't have programmers or a lot of programmers available internally. So you want to kind of have more like some kind of tool to be able to at least build it out. And doing something like this comes in very handy. I have another video later that I'm going to make talking about how we're going to pull data from SharePoint, and then we're going to upload it to this SFTP site that ultimately is going to drop into an S3 bucket, and we're going to do all of that without writing any code. We're going to use Microsoft Power Automate to make that happen. So that's a video that's going to be coming soon. But again, hopefully, that kind of gives you somewhat of an understanding of what it is. That's why it's called file transfer or transfer family. You're pretty much you're just moving files around, but in this case, it's moving it directly to an S3 bucket. Now it does have for the EFS. That's not what we're going to be talking about here. We're talking about S3. So that's kind of where we're going to be dropping files in there. Which again, once you do that, you're unlimited on what you can do. You can have all kinds of stuff happen automated after the fact to streamline the process, any kind of process you want. And you can see down here the diagram where you have your existing users that would drop. Again, they would use some kind of FTP application like FileZilla or so on, drop files. Ultimately, that will drop into this bucket. Then from here, you could again have an AWS Glue job run, AWS Lambda job running. The list goes on and on what you could do with it. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to kind of walk through the very basic stuff what needs to occur. The first thing that we need to do is I'm going to go to my IAM management console. We're going to create a policy. So the first thing we need to do is create a policy. The policy that we're going to create is going to specify, well, you know what? Before we create a policy, I actually need to take one step back. Let's go to our S3 bucket. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new bucket in here. So let me create a new bucket. This new bucket is going to be specifically for SFTP. So I'm going to call it like SFTP. Give it some kind of unique name, whatever name you want. In my case, I'm going to call it SFTP I am Lou. Oops, I am Lou. So that's going to be my name. SFTP I am Lou. Must not contain uppercase letters. Let me get that fixed. So SFTP I don't think I'll have hyphens. So SFTP I am Lou. That's gonna be my name. I don't think it's taken yet, so it should be fine. Leave the settings as is. That's fine. Create bucket. Cool. Now I have a bucket in here called SFTP I am Lou. So what I'm going to do here, and we're going to walk through the process. So just think of it like any SFTP that you may have in your organization. You may want to share access with multiple clients, but you don't want clients to have access to the same folder. So let's say, for example, I'm going to create a folder right now, and I'm going to call this client A. Oops, client. Let's just call it client. Client A, that's this folder. And then let's create another folder. We're going to call this client B, right? Because again, you can have multiple clients, and we're going to utilize this one bucket to be able to create subfolders inside, sub objects pretty much. But either way, subfolders, 'cause that's how we see it as. So the client that is given access would not see their the other people's information. They will only see their information, pretty much. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and now go back to our IAM console. We're going to create a policy. The policy is pretty much saying they have access to be able to access the S3 bucket environment, to be able to do puts, gets, deletes, and so on. So I'm going to JSON, and I kind of have that already set, so let me just copy and paste it in here. Now I'll kind of explain what, just what it's doing. So as you could tell, the action is gonna, this case S3 listing, it's being allowed, and it's going to be for the bucket that I created. So in my case, I'll call it SFTP IAM That's my bucket. So this is what this policy is going to have access to. So why am I creating a policy in this manner? I'm doing it because I want to be very specific of what they're able to access. For example, let's say I may create another bucket for another group of customers that's going to have access to an SFTP for whatever reason, right? And in that case, I could create another policy and things will be separated. They will not, from a policy standpoint, one policy will not have access to all the buckets. So it just kind of narrows down just kind of keep things separated. And you can see we have access to put objects, get objects, delete objects, get, put, all of that. So it gives us pretty much what we need. Next, tag, no tags, review. I'm going to call this SFTP transfer. That's the name of my policy, SFTP transfer, right? Boom, and it tells me S3 limited read writes permissions. Cool. Let's create policy. All right, so now that my policy is done, SFTP transfer. So keep that in mind because we're going to use this later. Now let's go to rows. So in the rows, I'm going to create a new row. This is going to be AWS service. That's fine. Let's go next. Oops. This would be, let's see. This is going to be transfer. Now let's hit next. Oops. Transfer and next. So in here, we have our policy that we just created right now, right? SFTP transfer. We want to attach this policy to this row. So let's go ahead and click on it. We're going to attach that. Hit next. And then this is going to be, let's give it a row name. So what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this SFTP transfer. Let's call it SFTP transfer. That's going to be my row name. Trusted entity. So down here under trusted entity, it's going to be, this is valid. Yep. This is fine. This all looks good. So I'm going to hit create row. Cool. So now if I go to my SFTP transfer row, we have our policy attached. Our trusted relationship is giving us trust to the transfer service. So now we have access to two services really, to the S3 bucket, but that's very specific bucket, then the transfer service. So those are the two things that we need, which we have access to. So now that we got this created, there's one more thing we need to do, which is going to be, we need to create our SSH keys, because we're going to create an SFTP, not FTP. So the difference between FTP and SFTP is FTP is not encrypted. So the only thing that's required is to put in a password to log in, but as data is transmitted over from a client, FTP client, to the actual server, the data not being encrypted or anything either. SFTP is, and it requires a specific key to be able to access the SFTP. So it kind of adds some layers of security. But we're going to be doing SFTP, which is why we need to create a key. So there's two ways to create a key. I'm going to walk through the process of the first way to create a key. One way would be we're going to use PuTTY to do so. So use WinSAP if you have WinSAP installed. So this will be more from my Windows users who are using Windows. Use that because that's most likely what you're using. Go to Tools, run PuTTY Gen. Make sure this is a 2048, 48 RSA. Then we're gonna click Generate. Cool. So one of the things I want you to keep in mind, we're not gonna put up paraphrase for now. We're gonna leave that blank. This key, public key here that we have right here, this is a open SSH format key. All right. And then of course, if we need to create a private key that's going to be open SSH, then you will go to Gen, export open SSH key. That will create a private open SSH key format. So by default, if I were to save this, like save public and save private, it's going to save it under the PPK format. Pretty much it's WinSAP format. The PPK format, it's a different format than the OpenSSH format. I'm not going to go do too much detail into that, but most applications, like again later on, I'm gonna be making a video of using Microsoft Power Automate and connecting to an SFTP site. In that example, and that in order to connect, it does not like the PPK format for your private key. It actually wants the OpenSSH key format. So most applications are going to want OpenSSH. Now, if you're using PuTTY, of course, to connect to this server to be able to download and access files and and so on, then that's where you will want to save your public and private key in the format that PuTTY generates for you. And in this case, though, we want the OpenSSH key format. Right, so just kind of keep that in mind. This is the format that I want it in. So what I'm going to do here is I could take this guy. Let me go to my text editor. And then I'm going to save it. And this will be my public key. So I'm going to save it somewhere. Let me save it. I think I just created a random folder file somewhere. So I'm going to call this public. Let me call it public open SSH. That's it. I don't need an extension. Doesn't matter. Save. Next, I'm going to do export to open SSH key. Yep. No paraphrase. That's fine. This is going to be my private key. Right. Keep that in mind. Private open SSH. Let me save. So now that it's saved it, now let's take a look at it real quick, right? So here's my. You could tell you're seeing the header which says private, and then this one doesn't say, but this is public. This public, we're gonna have to assign this. We're going to do that in a minute. We're going to assign it to the user that we're going to create that could have access to the SFTP site. So again, this is one way to do it using PuTTY. So keep that in mind. The other way to do it, and in my mind, this is going to be the more easier way to do it. And let's kind of walk through that process. Go to your terminal. Where is that? I don't have it open. Go to your terminal. We're going to do SSH. What is it called? Is it key gen? So right, by default it's gonna save it to my user profile folder, and that's fine. Just save it there, then you can move the files over. It is gonna save it under the ID RSA file format file name, which is fine. We could always change it. Nope, paraphrase. Now you could tell in my mind this is way more easier to do it than with PuTTY. You gotta open up the app, do this, that, or whatever, and then export out OpenSSH. This is very straightforward. If I go now to user SSH. These are the two files that I have. So let's open it up and let's take a look at it. This should be our private key. As you could tell, it looks very similar to this private key. Slightly different, but very, very similar, right? But over, if we take a look at our public key, the public key looks very similar to our public key over here. Same thing, right? A little bit longer, but the same, it starts off with SSH RSA. Same thing, SSH RSA. Then at the very end, it ends with RSA key. Then it has the date, year, months. Over here, does it have that? Nope, this one has something different. It has the name of the computer that was generated under. So it kind of uses that information to kind of generate the key. So either way, there's two ways to do it. I prefer the terminal way to do it. Nevertheless, though, if you're using Windows, if you're used to PuTTY, then just go to PuTTY Gen, and then just generate it. And then once you do that, go ahead and this will be your public key in the Open SSH format, which I strongly recommend to use because that's what most applications use anyways. And then just do an export Open SSH to export out your private key as well. Just save it as private. All right, so now that we have our keys generated, now we could get started. So let's go ahead and get started now. So now I'm going to go back to my AWS Web Services. We have, again, we created policy, we created a row, and we have our keys. So those are the first three things that we have to do before we even get started with AWS Transfer, right? So let me come back. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I don't want this anymore. This is one I was testing with, so I'm going to stop. Let me stop. Let's wait to finish it. Yep, it's stopping. So do keep in mind with AWS Transfer Family, it's not like an EC2 instance where when you're not using it, you could shut it off, like stop it, and you don't get charged. That's not how it works. Even if you stop it, you're still going to get billed. It's one of those services that once you generate, it's there. It's either running. I know it gives us two options to stop, but I think the stop option is probably more, think of it more of a, your end users that have access to it, like your clients that you gave keys to be able to drop files into or download files. They just cannot access it anymore. But the service, it's still, you're still being charged. It's still there. And so yeah, just keep that in mind. So that it's not like EC2 where you, at least if you stop it, you don't get charged anymore. That's not how it works. I believe the price, it's like $100 and something as well per month that you're gonna have to pay. So just kind of keep that in mind as well when you're thinking of if you go down this path to manage it. So now let's go ahead and create a new server. Okay, so now we're starting from the beginning. Let's set up an AWS transfer, right? I'm gonna create new server. I'm doing SFTP, which is why I have that clicked on. You could do FTP if you want, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing SFTP. Service manage, so that's what I'm using. I'm not using the AWS directory service. If you are, then you can use that, but in my case I am not. So I'm doing service managed. I want this to be accessed publicly because, again, if I'm going to be giving clients access to drop files in, it needs to be publicly available, not just internally where people that already have access to the VPC. I'm not going to provide a custom hosting. You can set up, go to routing 53 to set up the DNS. I'm not doing that, just keeping it basic, keeping it simple. Let's see, let's click on next. I want this to get dropped into an AWS S3 bucket, so that's why I've got that set. I'm not going to create a new row because remember, we created rows already right before that. We created a policy, a row, and our keys. Since I already created a row, let me go ahead and choose the row. And it's, let me refresh. There it goes, SFTP transfer. So that's my new row that I created. So these are the different algorithm policies that it has. leave it by default. I believe 2006 should be fine. I did some testing with the 2022 and I had issues with it. So, but I think 2006 should be fine. That should work. You should be okay with that. This could stay blank. That's fine. This is more of you're moving from another server. We're not doing that. Like an existing service already that you have. This is a brand new one that we're creating, so we're not going to do that. You could add your tags, of course. If you're gonna have mini, what is it for? The purpose. Maybe you got a test in a production. That's kind of where you could add your tags, right? Maybe you do something like service type, and this could be production. And then you may have another one called test. You could do something like that. But either way, it's up to you. Manage your workflow. We're gonna leave that blank. We don't need that right now. Banner, no banner. I'm not providing any banner in this case. Click on Next. Yep, everything should be good. Let's create server. So it doesn't have any users, which is fine, right? Because we just created it. So we'll get those new users added. So as this is being created, keep in mind, remember how we created 2 folders in here? These are going to be our 2 users that we're going to create. One user, again, we call client A. The other user, client B. The way I would normally do this, like if this was a production, and let's just do this for the purpose of testing, right? Let's say my client was called, one of my clients was Apple, right? So I will use their name as the folder. Let's say my second client was called Google, right? So these are two of your clients. Let me go ahead and delete these guys. Cool. So now that we got that deleted, we go back. Now we have folders inside our S3 bucket that are client specific. So when we get ready, let's kind of go back. Let's see if this is done. Nope, it's still starting up. So whenever this is started up, what we're going to do, we're going to add 2 users. And we're going to create those users. We could call the user name whatever we want. But each user is going to be pointed to a specific. Let's say we call the first user I don't know, just Apple, user Apple or something generic, right? And then we call the second user Google. Well, each user is going to be pointed to a specific folder in our S3 bucket. So as they connect and upload files, or they connect to be able to download files, they would only see files that's in their folder only. So let's see if this is done. It's still starting. It takes a couple of minutes, so hopefully it gets started. It finishes in a minute. Still going. Let's try again. Nope, still going. Let's try again. Still going. Let's try again. Finally online. Got it. Woo. All right, cool. So now that we're online, that means that the server has started. Again, tell the no users, so we're going to add users. Let's go ahead and click on the server. We'll see that it's a SFTP protocol. All of this is fine. Again, this is our endpoint. This is what we're going to be using. If we had a custom host name, then it would be something like SFTP dot, I don't know, myservices.com, or whatever domain you have. That's kind of the way it would be if we set it up that way. If not, this is what we will provide the client in order to connect to the SFTP site. So we'll walk through that in a minute. So this is our user section that we have here, right? So this is where we're going to create users. Let me go back to my file. So did I move these files over? I don't think I did. I'm going to copy these. So remember how we created 2 keys, one using PuTTY, one using the terminal. So we're going to need 2 keys because one is going to be for one client, the other one will be for another client. So let's go ahead and actually rename these, right? I think didn't we call our client Apple? One of them called Apple. So they just named the files properly so we know which keys belong to which client. So that would be Apple. The other one would be Google private, because this is a private. I don't need to put open SSH, just leave it blank. Then this other one will be our public key. This would be Google public. Cool. So we have our keys for Apple, and again, this will be just the name of your customers, right? So you will have to create keys for each one, which is what we did. Okay, so now we're gonna do add user. Our first user, we're gonna call this user. Oops. We're gonna call this user Apple, right? Let's just call it. Let me call it like SFTP Apple, and that's the name of the user. The row that we're gonna use is gonna be the SFTP transfer row. Because remember, we created policy in a row, so that's what this is. Then we're gonna specify in our home directory. This is gonna be our bucket. So in this case, it's the SFTP IMLU bucket, and then we're gonna. This section here is gonna be which folder they could have access to, which is gonna be the Apple folder. And we're gonna put restricted, which means they're restricted to that folder only. They cannot see nothing else, right? So it kind of tells you little details on the side. Next, we need to copy and paste the public key in here. So where's my? Let's close out of these. Apple public key. So I'm gonna now copy and paste my public key. Boom, paste it in there. That's it. Tags, I'm gonna leave it blank. Then we're gonna do add. So now I'm gonna add another user. I'm gonna call this user SFTP Google. The row is gonna be same thing, SFTP transfer. This will be the SFTP IMLU row. And then the folder they could have access to is going to be Google, and it's going to be restricted as well. Now let's go ahead and get our public key for Google, which is this guy. And then I'm going to copy this over, then we're going to hit add. So now we added 2 users to this, right? Apple and Google. In your case, you call them whatever your clients are, or whoever you want to have access. If I go back to our bucket, let's look at Apple. It's blank. There's no files in here, nothing. So now I'm gonna go back to my WinSAP, and we're gonna create a new connection. So again, let's go back to. This is gonna be my endpoint. Is gonna be my host. So that's my host. Port 22. It's fine because it's SFTP. Then my username for Apple is called SFTP Apple, because that's what I called it, right? Now there is no password because we're using keys to authenticate. So that's going to stay blank. In order for me to provide my key, I would go to Advanced Authentication, and then it will be Private Key. Now the only thing I just realized here, I don't think we created a PPK file, which I think that is what it's looking for. Since I'm going to be connecting with Putty, I should have created one. So let me go ahead and create one right quick, because I'm connecting in the manner that I am. So let me go to run gen. I'm going to load my private key. Then I'm going to save my private key. And I'll save this as Apple private just Apple private should be fine. Let me go back to the folder. Yep, it's a PPK file, so there's the extension. So now let me go back. I don't need this. I'm going to go to Advanced, Authenticate, Private Key. Here's my Apple private key in the PPK format. I'm going to hit OK. Let's hit save for now. Just if we need to come back, make changes. I'm going to call this SFTP Apple. Hit OK. So now let's go ahead and click on it. Yes, I want to get this cache. Boom, I'm connected. So now that I'm connected, I'm going to drop a file in there. Let's go ahead and drop a few files. I'm going to drop Brave, my AWS command line. Let's drop these files in here. So far it looks good. It's uploading. Skip. This has to do with like timestamps, and I don't care about that, so I'm skipping it. So now that I uploaded it, if I go to my S3 bucket, hit refresh, boom, we have data in there. Now again, keep in mind, if I go to my my client, the highest level that I could go to, I can't even move up a level. See? So I don't even see a folder. All I see is what I see. Now I believe once I'm in here, I could create new folders if I want. Like if I want to create a new directory, let's call it test. Hit OK. If I come back over here, we'll see a new folder here called test. So they have the access to do that, but the only level they could see is whatever's inside this Apple folder. That's it. They cannot see nothing else. You know, same thing goes with if I were to connect with another session, right? I'm going to create a new session, and this is going to be for the other account, the other user that I created, which would be SFTP Google. We're going to go to advanced, our private key. Let me test it out real quick. I think normally I always open it up with a PPK. I'm wondering if it works with the OpenSSH private key format. Nope. There we go. They asked me, do you want to convert it? So it does need to be converted to the PuTTY format, which is a PPK format. So I'm gonna say cancel. What I'm gonna do, go back to run gen, load. I'm gonna load my private key. But before I do that, I'm gonna let me rename this to OpenSSH format. So I'm gonna reload this guy. Then I'm gonna do save private. And then I'm gonna call this Google private. That's it. Save. Cool, that should be done. So now let me go back, go to advanced, authenticate. And then I got my Google private. But again, this private happens to be in the PPK format, which is the PuTTY format. So just keep that in mind. If you're using PuTTY to connect, you're gonna need to convert it to the PuTTY format. I'm gonna hit OK. Then hit save. Let's call it SFTP Google. So now let's go ahead and connect. So as you can see, when we connect, there is no files in here, but we could go ahead and drop a few files. Let's drop 3 files in here. We're gonna again skip the timestamp once we get that error message that pops up for timestamp. Skip all. Cool. So now we see we have files in there. Again, if I go to my S3 bucket, there's nothing in here because very specific. If I go to Google folder, boom, we have our files in there. It's separate. So as clients connect, just like the way I did, they could only see their stuff and their stuff only. That's it. They don't see nothing else. Now, as you could tell, since these files are being dropped into an S3 bucket, this is where you can get creative, right, to more streamline and automate your process. So if you're doing data processing for your clients and they have to provide files for you, that's where now you can be like, okay, files are dropped. You can create a trigger or have a schedule that will start extracting the data from these files. Let's say load it to Redshift or manipulate the files or whatever, right? It's really up to you. on what you're trying to do. But this would help automate that process, where before the traditional way of doing things would have been traditional SFTP. They got to drop it in there. You got to have now a process to download those files, whether it be periodically, most likely, but download the files. And then you end up moving these files over to an S3 bucket or so on. And then the process starts. Now you kind of skip that step because the file's being dropped directly to your S3 bucket. And then you could just have a trigger to go off using Lambda, a schedule, whatever, right? It's really up to you to do whatever you need to do. So again, I have another video coming up where we're going to use this, and we're going to ultimately use Power Automate to have a schedule that's going to run, that's going to download files from SharePoint, and it's going to connect to this specific SFTP that we just created, which means it's going to be dropping files directly to an S3 bucket. So I'm going to show that process of it, and that what I just mentioned right now is a non-programmatic way to move files from SharePoint to S3 bucket without using any code. That's pretty much what we're doing in that case. So that video will be next. That will be one of my next videos to come. Hopefully this helped y'all out. Hopefully this kind of gives you a better understanding of what is AWS Transfer, how to use it, how to set it up, not just how to use it, but also, as you saw, there were some prerequisitions that needed to be set up first, like policy, row, SSH keys. You need to do all of that first, and then you go to the process of setting it up. But it's very easy, just like as you notice as I went to add users. But once you got everything set up, it becomes very easy after that to add new users, to get them set up. So if you're going to be giving clients where a SFTP access, service where they, you're the one hosting it, this is a good solution, and it's very easy to add new clients, new users as needed. But again, guys, hopefully this helps out. Give me a like, give me a follow. I appreciate everything, man. I appreciate all the love I've been getting here on the platform, and talk to y'all later.